Hello everyone, and today I will be talking to Bryan Teixeira, who's the chair of the EATG's policy working group. And why we are talking to Bryan today is because we are in Bucharest in Romania having a meeting of the policy working group. So why did we come here, Bryan?
Well, EATG, the sort of remit for it extends across Europe, what's called WHO Europe, which basically is from the Atlantic all the way to Central Asia. And we're in what would be considered Central Europe at this point, which is a good place for bridging what's happening with the epidemic in the West and the quite different epidemic that's happening in the East. But there's also some unique things happening here in Central Europe as well. So it's just a chance to not only talk about policy in general, but to be aware of real contexts and differences in what the epidemic means in different parts of Europe.
What are, in your view, currently the biggest issues in this region?
In this region, it's usually considered to be a low prevalence region. So the sort of relationship between the number of people that have HIV and the general population is relatively low. However, it's not clear, to me at least, whether that lowness is actually a fact or whether it's more a result of lack of HIV testing, which would then raise the amount. And we were hearing just yesterday in some cases that where even there is testing, which is not as widespread as we would expect, the materials used are not of the best quality. So if you've got a situation where that's the case, then it's really hard to assume it's really low prevalence. But if it is, then a key strategy becomes how do you keep it low? So there's a network of countries in this region that focus very much on how do you keep the prevalence level low. So it's largely a prevention strategy and also treatment of people with HIV. Those would be probably priorities, but it's all on the assumption that it really is low at this point.
Which we don't quite know.
No.
With such low testing rates.
Yeah.
So that brings me actually to my next question, because there has been some skepticism around the 90-90-90 target set by the UNAIDS, and you will probably know I'm also one of the skeptics. What do you think needs to be done in this particular region? And you spoke about testing,
yeah.
But what else do you think needs to be done in order to come a little closer to the 90 target?
Yeah, I mean the big issue underneath the 90-90-90 target, which is basically 90% of the people that have HIV are tested, 90% of that group are no longer detectable as far as the virus. A big issue is just funding. So, and I think this has been a blind spot in the whole propagation of this idea of 90-90-90, and really it's 90-90-90, and then it's 500,000 people globally that are that should be the maximum of new infections, and there should be zero discrimination, HIV-related discrimination. But it's been clear from the beginning that there's a significant financial investment, and the governments signed up to this. And at this point, there are places where the funding is being put together to reach that kind of target. The Global Fund just recently was quite successful, which really is just dealing with countries that largely aren't within Europe. So, but you still got in Central Europe especially, and Eastern Europe, Central Asia, there are countries that just will not be able on their own to put together the resources to achieve 90-90-90, to limit the amount of new infections. And there is not a lot of evidence at this point that there's a huge groundswell in addressing the HIV discrimination, the criminalization laws, whether it's criminalizing HIV transmission, criminalizing gay people, criminalizing sex work, criminalizing. So the funding to me is the big problem, the fly in the ointment, as we say. in achieving 1990. And we know which is the chicken and which is the egg. Is it political will or is it the money? Probably those two together are kind of a real problem.
Right. Now you were talking about discrimination against people living with HIV, legal and otherwise, and I know that that the policy working group has been doing tremendous work together with the HIV Justice Network and other organizations as well. And sometimes there is some criticism that much of the work that the policy working group does is not so very visible. Can you shed a little more light on that kind of work in cooperation with international entities and organizations? What's going on there?
Yes. I think it is true what you're saying. I mean, policy is an area that it's hard to, I mean, this is different from like a kind of project work, which you can say, well, we'll start the project 1 year, by year 2 we'll be really running, and by year 3 we'll have done it. I mean, a project cycle can be 20 years. It can be, effectively a generations. If you're talking about changes in law and changes on stigma and prejudice, you're probably talking about something that's generational. So it's a very slow process. I think with criminalization, which is a good example, that there was a criminalization of HIV transmission. There was a lot of energy, there was focus, there was money put behind that. There were key people, as we know, that have a lot of energy, and so that helped move that forward. I think that isn't happening in the same way with other issues. For instance, I mean, like I mentioned, there's criminalization of gay people in parts of Europe, or sex work, or drug addicts. But there is energy being put behind some of those, but not nearly the kind of profile that criminalization of HIV transmission was able to get. In terms of other things that are happening, though, in policy, that are sort of often under the radar, there is the Civil Society Forum on HIV, and then another forum on drugs. Those are both European Union level places where NGOs and also member states can communicate with each other about issues and try to arrive at common solutions, common positions. So that's happening, but that's sort of ongoing. We often don't see the impacts of that. What we're just looking at right now is, one of the things we're looking at right now is working with some of the groups in Eastern Europe where the epidemic is largely, but not only, but largely driven within, or related to, I should say, related to drug use. And so issues of how do you deal with drug users, how do you deal with what's called harm reduction is really important. But EATG is just beginning then a kind of dialogue with organizations who have a much longer history there dealing with this issue to figure out how can we collaborate. So it seems as though some of the issues that are really important for Central and Eastern Europe have to do with a new way of collaborating with groups who are already on the ground doing this long before EATG sort of woke up to them. And so that's, there's also not just within the policy group, but at sort of policy levels, EATG more widely is looking at things around how do you drive the discussion around PrEP, how do you just, even about aging. EATG has sort of led, in a sense, certainly within Europe, I think, certainly at the NGO level, discussions about, as people with HIV age, what are some of the issues? So sort of how HIV medicine and geriatric medicine, if you want, again, need to collaborate more. But then out of that fall policy issues about how, what should be EATG be pushing for within these two disciplines that should be more in collaboration. I think if I were to boil it down, I keep thinking of the mission statement of EATG, and there are three things in there. One is that you want to give people speedy access. So I think as we're looking across Europe, where are things moving too slowly? So that should really jump out at us. Next is medicines and diagnostics that are state of the art, the best ones. So look across Europe, people are using diagnostics, people are using medicines. Are they the best? Then we go there. Right. And then the last thing is basically around people with HIV and other key populations. And I think that mission statement, those three things, when we're deciding what we should be doing, is there speedy access? Is it state of the art? And is it hitting people with HIV and key populations? If it's not doing that, well, maybe we could get involved, but we should put our money and our energy there.
Right.
And that's sort of the vision that I've been trying to push. I felt like if I talked too much.
No, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.